Now, my great pleasure to welcome our next representative, Dr. David Renne. Dave, you are the immediate past president, I think that's your formal role, of the International Solar Energy Society. And you're still representing ISIS at the Renne Alliance. And you want to speak about, I think that's another important challenge, comment on international supply chains, an important industrial aspect. Dave, a very good morning too. I think you are based in Colorado now, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Yes, I would like to just make a few comments about supply chains. These were already addressed by our excellent three speakers earlier, and in particular, Ricardo teed up the supply chain issue about the need for a reliable and certainly economic supply chains, international supply chains to power the energy transformation. So I'd like to address 4 points here regarding supply chains. First of all, and of course, as we all know, the pandemic has reminded us as to how vulnerable our globalized and even some local supply chains can be to disruptions, such as from the pandemic. And so part of what this has driven is a need to, or has identified a need to create more local manufacturing. In other words, not to rely on just a few countries to provide the major source of our energy, of our transformed energy systems. And my focus is going to be perhaps on the solar technologies, both as we saw from the previous presentations, that solar photovoltaics, for example, is going to play a very major role in the electrification of our energy sector, but there's also solar thermal technologies that are going to play key roles in certain niche markets for solar thermal, or for thermal applications. But I think some of these comments apply perhaps for the entire energy transformation. So again, the first point, the pandemic has reminded us of how vulnerable we are to our globalized systems. Another point is that geopolitics plays a very important role, and certain steps have been taken in recent years that can actually harm supply chains. We've had some tariff wars taking place in recent years. Punitive tariffs can be harmful. We need to continue to look for fair trade practices globally to avoid supply chains being affected by unreasonable tariffs. Another point is this traceability of where the supplies are coming from. There's some industries are concerned about making sure that fair labor practices go into the manufacturing of systems, and these need to be considered when we look at economically viable and reliable supply chains. A third point I would like to make is the access to rare earth or critical metals. This is going to be very critical, especially in the solar community, for example, and in the wind community. Certain materials such as copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, as well as rare earth materials, we're going to need much more access to these materials in the energy transformation. And so it's going to be very critical that we make sure that the access to these materials is available to power our energy transformation. One area that this is that's supporting this is in the corporate sourcing of raw materials. That can be very critical here. Battery metals are going to be very important as we see going forward. So we need very transparent, secure, sustainable, and fair supply chains to get access to these materials. I would like to call attention, for example, to the figure in the IEA Net Zero Energy Report, figure 4.8, which is on page 163, which very basically shows how currently coal is the most valuable, or has the highest value for critical materials in the energy supply chain. But by 2050, coal is going to be almost disappear in that, and we have to consider the other critical materials, such not only rare earth materials, but silicon and manganese, cobalt, graphite, nickel, lithium, and copper are going to be the primary materials that are going to be of value for this energy transformation. And then the fourth point is disposal and recycling of used or unusable systems. We've already experienced over the last generation, new generations of wind turbine technologies coming into place. There's been replanting of wind turbines all over the world. And this is beginning to happen in solar as well, as we get more reliable solar systems to replace older and failing systems. This is going to create a significant amount of potential raw materials for recycling purposes to help alleviate some of the rare earth and critical metals supply chain that we're going to be facing here. So for solutions, continued international cooperation, and addressing the geopolitical situation, but also recognizing national interests as we do that. Corporate sourcing initiatives based on sustainability practices are going to be a very critical step in this supply chain issue. A shift of all investments, such as going from internal combustion engines to green technologies, must take place right away so that we can get the supply chains supporting those new systems put into place, and improve technology and efficiencies and recycling efforts to minimize supply chain issues with raw materials. So those are my points, and I want to thank our three speakers for teeing up the supply chain issues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. And indeed, this is a very important topic, and kind of underlining why Paolo rightly said that there are numbers which are impressive when we look at it from today. So we have to create these supply chains, and I think we all know that this is not something that happens, just doesn't come automatically. So we have to be focused on that.